What happens when one of the most controversial figures in modern royal history sits down with a host known for never holding back? The answer is television chaos that nobody saw coming. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening, the kind of heat that makes even the most seasoned celebrities sweat under pressure. But Meghan Markle walked onto that set looking composed, polished, every hair in place, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people make in a month. She settled into the chair across from Andy Cohen with that practiced smile we have all seen 1,000 times, the one that says she is ready for anything. But what she was not ready for was Andy Cohen deciding that tonight the gloves were coming off. Before we get into what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about all of this. Trust me, you are going to want to follow along for every single moment of this disaster. Andy started off friendly enough, welcoming her to the show, complimenting her outfit, doing all the usual talk show host pleasantries. Meghan laughed at his jokes, leaned back in her chair, clearly thinking this was going to be another softball interview where she could control the narrative like she always does. She started talking about her latest project, some initiative about women empowerment or global charity work, the kind of vague description that sounds important but does not really say anything concrete. That is when Andy cut her off mid-sentence. Not rudely, but firmly. The way you interrupt someone when you have had enough of the rehearsed talking points. Andy looked at her with this expression that was half amusement, half genuine curiosity, and said, "Okay, but can we talk about what people actually want to know? Because I have got to be honest with you, Meghan. Nobody watching this show right now cares about another carefully crafted statement about empowerment. They want to know about the real stuff. The messy stuff." You could see Meghan's face change. That smile froze for just a second, like she was processing whether he actually just said what he said. She recovered quickly, laughing it off, saying something about how she is always happy to be real and authentic. But Andy was not buying it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, getting into that position he does when he is about to ask the question that makes everyone uncomfortable. He said, "Let me ask you something that I think everyone has been wondering. You have spent years now talking about how you were treated by the royal family, how terrible it was, how you were misunderstood and pushed out. But here is what I do not get. You knew what you were signing up for, right? I mean, you are a smart woman. You did your research, you knew the protocols, you knew the rules. You knew this was not going to be like Hollywood. So why do you keep acting surprised that it was not a fairy tale?" The audience went dead silent. You could hear someone cough in the back row. Meghan's smile was completely gone now, replaced by this tight expression that she gets when she is trying to maintain composure. She started to answer, saying that nobody can truly understand what it is like until they live it, that the reality was far more complex than anyone could imagine from the outside. But Andy was not done. He interrupted again, and this is where things started to really go off the rails. He said, "Okay, but Meghan, you have given interview after interview. You have done the documentaries, you have had your friends leak stories to the press. You have made this your entire brand for the past few years. At what point does it stop being about telling your truth and start being about just staying relevant? Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you left one spotlight and spent every day." Since trying to get back into a bigger one, Meghan's jaw literally dropped. She tried to laugh it off, saying that was quite an accusation, that she has been trying to live a private life. And that is when Andy just looked at her like she had just told him the earth was flat. "Private," Andy said, leaning back and throwing his hands up. "Meghan, you have done more media appearances in the last 3 years than most A-list celebrities do in a decade. You are on magazine covers. You are doing podcasts. You are signing Netflix deals. You are at every major event. That is not private. That is called being a celebrity. Which is fine, but let us not pretend it is something it is not." Meghan tried to redirect, talking about how she has used her platform for good, how everything she does is about making a positive impact. But Andy was relentless now, like a dog with a bone. He brought up specific instances, specific interviews, specific moments where she contradicted herself or where the timelines did not quite add up. He did it all with that smile on his face, that trademark Andy Cohen way of being brutal while somehow still seeming charming. Then he went for the throat. He said, "Let me ask you about Oprah. That interview where you talked about the conversation about your son's skin color. That was a huge moment, obviously very serious allegations. But then later, you and Harry both clarified that it was not the Queen or Prince Philip who made those comments. So who was it? Because you made this massive accusation that affected real people, real reputations, but then you both backed away from giving any actual names. Do you not think that is kind of irresponsible? To drop a bomb like that and then just leave everyone to speculate? Meghan's composure was cracking. You could see it in her eyes, the way her hands gripped the armrests of her chair. She said that they never intended to cause harm, that they were just being honest about their experience, that people took it the wrong way. Andy shot back immediately. No, Meghan, people took it exactly the way you presented it. You sat there on one of the biggest platforms in the world and made it sound like the royal family was full of racists. And then when the backlash came, when people started demanding answers, you backtracked. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot drop allegations like that and then hide behind privacy and nuance. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Some people were nodding along with Andy. Others looked uncomfortable, like they could not believe this was actually happening on live television. Meghan was visibly flustered now, her voice getting sharper. More defensive, she said something about how Andy was twisting her words, that he was not understanding the context, that this was exactly the kind of treatment she had been talking about. And Andy just laughed. Not a mean laugh, but an incredulous one. Like he could not believe she was trying to play the victim card right now. On his show, after everything he just laid out, he said, "Come on, Meghan, you cannot pull that card every single time someone asks you a tough question. That is not being attacked. That is called being held accountable. There is a difference." Meghan sat up straighter in her chair, and you could see her shifting tactics. She was not going to play defense anymore. She was going to go on the offense. She looked directly at Andy and said, "You know what, Andy? I think what is really happening here is that you have already made up your mind about me before I even walked through that door. You are not interested in a conversation. You are interested in a takedown. And frankly, I expected better from someone who claims to champion women and marginalized voices." The audience gasped. She had just accused Andy Cohen of being a hypocrite on his own show. Andy's eyebrows shot up, and for a second he looked genuinely surprised. But then that signature smirk came back, the one that said he was actually enjoying this. Andy said, "Oh, so now I am the bad guy because I am asking you questions that you do not like. Meghan, I have interviewed hundreds of people on this show. I ask everyone tough questions. That is literally my job. And you know what the difference is between you and most of my other guests? They answer them. They do not try to make me the villain for asking," Meghan shot back. "There is a difference between tough questions and a hostile interview. You have been coming at me from the moment I sat down. Every single thing you have said has been designed to paint me in the worst possible light. You are not looking for answers. You are looking for a gotcha moment." Andy leaned forward again, and his tone got more serious. He said, "You want to know what a gotcha moment is? A gotcha moment is when you tell the world that you got married 3 days before your actual wedding. And then the Archbishop of Canterbury has to come out and say that is not actually legally possible. A gotcha moment is when you claim you had no idea what you were getting into with the royal family. But then people dig up interviews from years before where you literally talked about Princess Diana and the royals. Those are gotcha moments, Meghan, because they are your own words coming back to contradict you." Meghan's face was red now. She said, "I never claimed to know nothing about the royal family. What I said was that I did not understand the full scope of what my life would become. And as for the wedding, that was a private spiritual ceremony. It was meaningful to us." Andy cut her off, "But you presented it on international television, like it was your actual wedding. You sat there with Oprah and made it sound like you had this secret wedding that nobody knew about. And then when you got called out for it, you tried to reframe it as something spiritual. Do you not see how that looks? It looks like you got caught in an exaggeration and tried to spin your way out of it." The tension in the studio was suffocating. Meghan looked like she was deciding whether to walk off the set or keep fighting. She chose to keep fighting. She said, "I am not going to sit here and let you twist everything I have ever said to fit whatever narrative you have decided to push. You have made up your mind about me, just like the British tabloids did, just like everyone who wants to tear me down does. I came here thinking we could have an actual conversation. But clearly that was a mistake. Andy spread his hands wide, his voice calm but firm. He said, "Meghan, I am literally using your own words. I am not making anything up. If you feel like your own statements are making you look bad, maybe the problem is not with me asking about them. Maybe the problem is with the statements themselves. And as for the tabloids, yeah, some of them were brutal and unfair. Nobody is denying that. But you have also used the tabloids when it suited you. You have had your friends give anonymous quotes. You have leaked stories when you wanted certain narratives out there. You cannot weaponize the media when it helps you, and then cry victim when it does not." Meghan looked stunned. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out for a moment. Then she said, her voice shaking slightly, "That is an incredibly unfair characterization of what I have been through. You have no idea what it is like to have the entire world pick apart every single thing you do, every word you say, every choice you make. You sit here in your comfortable studio with your talk show and you judge me, but you have never lived a day in my shoes." Andy nodded slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was softer but no less pointed. He said, "You are absolutely right. I have not lived your life. But here's the thing, Meghan. Neither have most people. And yet you expect everyone to understand your struggles, while you show very little understanding for anyone else's perspective. You talk about empathy and compassion, but where is that empathy when it comes to your own family? Your father, your sister, even the royal family. It is always everyone else who wronged you, everyone else who misunderstood you. At some point, do you not have to look in the mirror and ask if maybe, just maybe, you played a part in some of this?" The audience was completely silent. Some people looked uncomfortable, others were nodding. Meghan looked like she had been slapped. She said quietly, "My father sold stories about me to the tabloids. My sister has made a career out of trashing me in the media. And the royal family, they hung me out to dry when I needed support the most. So no, Andy, I do not think I need to take responsibility for other people's cruelty." Andy sighed. And for the first time in the interview, he looked almost sympathetic. He said, "Look, I am not saying you did not get a raw deal in some ways. I am sure there were moments that were genuinely awful. But you have also profited enormously from your victim narrative. You and Harry signed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars based largely on your willingness to air your grievances publicly. You have built an entire brand around being the wronged princess, and that is fine. That is your choice. But you cannot build a brand on being a victim and then get upset when people start questioning whether you are milking it." Meghan stood up, not abruptly, but deliberately, like she had made a decision. She said, "I think we are done here." Andy stayed seated, looking up at her calmly. He said, "You are welcome to leave if you want, but running away from tough questions kind of proves my point, does it not?" Meghan froze. She was clearly torn between walking out and staying to defend herself. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was watching, and every second of her hesitation was being broadcast live. She slowly sat back down, but her body language was completely closed off now. Arms crossed, jaw set. She said, "Fine. What else do you want to grill me about?" Andy said, "I want to talk about Harry, because here is what I genuinely do not understand. You married into one of the most famous families in the world. You had to know that came with scrutiny and pressure. But did you ever stop to think about what you were asking Harry to give up? He walked away from his entire life, his family, his country, his military titles, everything he knew because you could not handle the pressure. Does that ever weigh on you?" Meghan's eyes flashed with anger. She said, "Harry made his own choices. Nobody forced him to do anything. He saw what was happening to me. He saw how I was being treated, and he chose to protect his family. That is what a good husband does." Andy pressed on. "But he did not just protect you, Meghan. He burned every bridge he had in the process. He trashed his brother in your Netflix documentary. He wrote a book airing out every private family conversation. He went on interviews calling his family trapped and criticizing the institution that his grandmother devoted her entire life to. And all of that happened after you came into the picture. So yeah, maybe he made his own choices, but you cannot tell me you did not influence those choices." Meghan was furious. She said, "How dare you blame me for Harry finally standing up for himself and speaking his truth? He was miserable long before he met me. I gave him the courage to leave a toxic situation." Andy said, "Or maybe you gave him permission to blow up his life because it suited your narrative." The studio felt like it was about to explode. Meghan was gripping the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles had turned white, and Andy was staring at her with this unflinching expression that made it clear he was not backing down no matter what happened next. The audience seemed split. Some people looked horrified at how brutal this interview had become. Others were completely riveted, leaning forward in their seats like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Meghan's voice came out low and controlled, but you could hear the fury underneath every word. She said, "You do not know anything about my marriage or what Harry and I have been through together. You are sitting here making assumptions based on tabloid gossip and your own biases. Harry is happier now than he has ever been. He has told me that himself, repeatedly. He does not regret leaving. He regrets that his family could not be happy for him, that they could not support him in choosing his own path." Andy tilted his head, and when he spoke, his tone was almost conversational, which somehow made his words cut even deeper. He said, "But that is just it, Meghan. It was not really his own path, was it? It was your path. Harry spent his entire life in England. He was devoted to his military service. He was close with his brother despite their differences. He understood his role in the institution. And then you came along, and suddenly all of that was terrible and toxic and needed to be escaped from. You do not think that is convenient? You do not think it is interesting that Harry only started seeing his entire life as a prison after he married someone who never wanted to be part of that life in the first place?" Meghan shook her head, her voice rising. She said, "That is such a simplistic way of looking at it. Harry had doubts long before me. He struggled with his role. He hated the media intrusion. He watched what happened to his mother, and he was terrified of history repeating itself. I did not create those feelings. They were already there. All I did was give him a partner who understood and supported him." Andy leaned back and crossed his arms. He said, "Okay, let me ask you this then. If Harry had all these doubts and struggles before you, why is it that he never acted on them until after you got married? He served his country. He did his royal duties. He maintained relationships with his family. But the moment things got hard for you, suddenly he was ready to throw it all away. That does not sound like a man following his own convictions. Meghan, that sounds like a man trying to keep his wife happy." The audience reacted audibly to that. Some gasps, some murmurs of agreement. Meghan looked out at the crowd and then back at Andy, and you could see something shift in her expression. She was realizing that this was not going the way she had planned, that the audience was not automatically on her side, that Andy had managed to plant seeds of doubt even among people who might have been sympathetic to her coming in. She took a breath and said, "I think what you are really asking is whether I manipulated Harry into leaving his family, and the answer is no. What I did was love him enough to be honest about what I could and could not live with. I told him that I could not raise our children in an environment where they would be treated as second class, where the institution cared more about protecting its image than protecting us. I told him that I could not stay in a situation where I was being destroyed mentally and emotionally, and he made the choice that any decent human being would make. He chose his wife and children over an outdated system that treats people like commodities." Andy nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. Then he said, "That is a very moving speech, Meghan. Very well rehearsed. But here is what I keep coming back to. You talk about protecting your children, about wanting privacy and safety for them, but then you name-drop them constantly in interviews. You bring them up in your public statements. You use them as justification for every decision you make. If you really wanted privacy for your kids, would they not be the one thing you kept completely out of the public eye? Instead, we know their names, we hear stories about them, they are part of your brand. So which is it? Do you want privacy, or do you want sympathy?" Meghan's face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. She finally said, "I mention my children because they are the reason I do what I do. Everything I have fought for has been about giving them a better life than what was being offered to them in that system. And yes, I talk about them because they are a huge part of my life. But there is a difference between me choosing to share something about my family on my own terms and having photographers chase us down the street or having tabloids make up stories about them." Andy jumped on that immediately. He said, "Okay, but you just made my point for me. You want to control the narrative. You want to decide what gets shared and when and how. But life does not work that way, especially not when you are a public figure who has actively courted publicity. You cannot sign deals with Netflix and Spotify. You cannot do magazine covers and podcast interviews. You cannot attend high-profile events and then turn around and say, you just want to be left alone. That is not how this works, and you know it. Meghan stood up again, and this time her body language made it clear she was done. She said, I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked and psychoanalyzed by someone who clearly has an agenda. This has been nothing but a hit job from the start, and I am not going to sit here and continue to be your punching bag for entertainment. Andy stayed in his seat, completely calm. He said, Meghan, asking you to back up your own statements is not a hit job. Pointing out contradictions in your narrative is not an attack. The fact that you are calling this an ambush tells me that you are so used to friendly interviews where nobody challenges you that you have forgotten what actual journalism looks like. I have asked you tough questions, yes, but I have not been unfair. Everything I have brought up has been based on things you yourself have said publicly. If you cannot defend your own words, that is not my problem. The audience erupted. Some people started clapping, others were shaking their heads. A few people were literally standing up trying to get a better view of what was happening. The energy in the room was absolutely chaotic. Meghan stood there for a long moment, clearly trying to decide her next move. You could see her calculating, trying to figure out if walking off would make her look weak, or if staying would just give Andy more ammunition. She chose to stay, but barely. She sat back down on the very edge of her chair, like she was ready to bolt at any second. She said, her voice tight, Fine, you want me to defend myself? Let me be very clear about something. I've spent years being vilified by people who do not know me, who have never met me, who have decided based on tabloid stories and rumors that I am some kind of manipulative villain, and now you are doing the same thing. Sitting here acting like you have me all figured out based on edited clips and out-of-context quotes. You do not know what I have been through. You do not know what it is like to have the entire world turn on you for daring to exist, for daring to marry someone you love, for daring to speak up when you are being mistreated. Andy let her finish. And then he said quietly, You are right. I do not know what that is like. But I do know what it is like to watch someone play the victim while refusing to take any accountability for their own actions. And that is what this feels like, Meghan. Every time someone questions you, you hide behind your trauma. Every time someone points out an inconsistency, you accuse them of attacking you. At what point do you stop blaming everyone else and start looking at your own behavior? Meghan stared at him for a long moment, and then she did something nobody expected. She laughed. Not a genuine laugh, but a bitter, exhausted sound. She said, You know what, Andy? You have already decided who I am. Nothing I say here is going to change your mind or anyone else's. People are going to believe what they want to believe. So what is the point? Why should I sit here and justify my existence to you or anyone else? Andy said, Because you put yourself in the public eye. Because you made your story public. Because you asked for the world's attention and sympathy. You do not get to do all of that and then act surprised when people have questions or doubts. That is the trade-off, Meghan. You wanted the platform, you got it. But platforms come with scrutiny. Meghan gathered her composure one last time. She looked directly into the camera and said, To anyone watching this who has ever felt misunderstood, who has ever been attacked for telling their truth, who has ever been made to feel like they do not matter, I see you. I know what it is like, and I am not going to apologize for surviving or for protecting my family. Andy can sit here and pick apart everything I have said and done, but at the end of the day, I know who I am. I know what I have been through, and I know that I made the right choices for me and my family. Then she stood up, removed her microphone, and walked off the set. The cameras followed her as she disappeared through the side door, and Andy sat there watching her go with this expression that was part disbelief, part vindication. He turned to the audience and said, Well, I guess that is one way to end an interview. The audience did not know how to react. What did you think about all of this? Do you think Andy went too far, or do you think Meghan needed to be held accountable? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts.